I wanted to talk a little bit about the history of the Porch Creek Nation, because I understand that when Manifest Destiny happened, when the white settlers were coming in and driving Native Americans out, that your nation split, and some stayed in Alabama and some went to Oklahoma and west. So how did they survive? And I'll ask this first with you, Christina. How did they survive in Alabama? By staying?
That's a good question. The Creek Nation was quite flux, historically. The Creek Nation was very large and powerful in the Southeast. And the Creek had always had like an ebb and flow. If you, as other tribes would be reduced in size and number and kind of need the protection, they would ebb and flow as long as you subscribe to the Creek philosophy, the ways, the organization. But at some point, the intense stressors of colonialists, you had, even early on, Spanish were coming from the south, and you had the French from the north, the Brits from the east. It was an inundation of the way of life. I can only imagine being in a position with you, your family, and having to make such a life-altering, life-sustaining decision. And I don't know what I would do back in the day when faced with that same strain. At some point, it is a small area, and I can only assume that they just were there, the community, they moved into the shadows. You lived as modest as you could, and didn't draw attention, and moved off to the side and lived in the areas where nobody weren't as desirable, and tried to eke out an existence.
Yeah, so a matter of staying out of sight and assimilating where you had to.
Assimilation yes, that's a big part of it, yes.
Right.
The census reports, you didn't put that you were Native American.
Mm-hmm.
Really?
Well, you didn't want to be considered,
I see.
All down to assimilation. You didn't want to be Native American,
So, oh dear.
I think that was probably the least of their worries.
Yeah, right.
About survival.
Well, let's talk about the reservation, because the reservation is there in Alabama.
Yes.
And I do know you have a casino on the reservation. What is the life like on the reservation? Because so many reservations are in very dire straits without running water, without housing. So what's it like on the Porch Creek Reservation?
I'd say it's very modernized. I mean, they have health facilities. There's schools. I think when people think reservations, they're just thinking a bunch of empty land with teepees on it, and that's not what it is.
So is that due to the casino profits going? Is there a percentage of the profit that goes into developing businesses and health clinics, et cetera, on the reservation?
Again, so does the census. If you're Native American, the government does, it's part of the Treaty Acts that they need to provide certain funds for reservations. So.
Okay. Do you want to say anything more about the reservation, Christina, before we move on?
Yeah, I again reiterate that Bree and we didn't have the benefit of, I would say benefit, because that's where our cultural hub is. We didn't have the benefit of growing up on the reservation. I know, reservation and the idea of it and the reality of it is different from, as you pointed out, from tribe to tribe. Bree is right. Our area is quite modernized, and we do have, we started with bingo, and then it grew into casino, and so there is a lot of funds, and they do put back into the community. We have a museum, which I like to visit every time I go up to connect with. So I think that's important. And just various programs. There's a language program. There's a cultural program. They take what I really appreciate is that the graduating seniors are allowed, they provide them a cultural related exchange trip. So they come in and they get to be educated on the culture, learn some of our unique cultural practices, and then go to another Native community and kind of like in a cultural exchange capacity and learn and grow. And I think that's very important in this day and age. So they, and we individually benefit because they put back into the people. And I used a lot of the money. I was able to go to school and bachelor's, master's, doctoral degree that was paid for, and was not all paid for, but a big percentage was paid for by some of the programs that they provide to us as tribal members.
Bree, how is it you stay in touch? Because I know in talking with you in the past, and you've spoken earlier about, you have made trips to the reservation, but how do you stay in touch with what's going on there, given that you live in Tampa?
Facebook, ironically enough, the tribe's done pretty well about communicating, whether it be newsletters or they do robocalls now. So thanks to modern technology, we are able to get more than what we would have growing up. I think that's probably why we are feeling the urge and desire to, personally, I can't speak for Christina, but thanks to modern technology, I'm learning more and more, and now I'm like, okay, I need more, I'm hungry for more. So I guess just trying to, we don't have family up there anymore.
Okay.
But just through Facebook and, connecting with my uncles that are a little bit more connected with the tribe, and Christina, she's having on her journey as well.
Yeah, I know. Christine, that's what I want to ask you about. What is the governing, is the tribal council? What is the governing like of the reservation? How is that?
We have a chair, and then tribal council. It's very much as when historically, when part of the Treaty Act, right, when tribes were relocated and reestablished, a lot of tribes are reestablished, and their governing bodies are very much mimic the U.S. We have a constitution, and we have the different bodies of government, and the tribal council and the Madam Chair, they are our governing authority. Of course, we do have policies and procedures, and there's a code of ethics, and a constitution which guides the activities. But the tribal council, of course, is the main governing aspect of the tribe.
So I'm on my third class now. It's very difficult language to learn, but I'm learning little by little, and it's something that I've always wanted, and I try. So I go and learn a sentence, and then I run straight to my kids. Okay, this is what you're going to say. This is what you're going to do.
So what is it you're learning exactly?
Creek language.
Oh my gosh. Oh, what a wonderful way to keep it alive.
Yeah. And that's relatively new. They, it's not always been offered to out of area network, just because we haven't had that advantage. But now with social media and Zoom, we're able to, be connected more with the tribe. I
want to go to a topic that I heard the words, Bree, first from you, stolen sisters. And I just want to give you a little information that I found that I'm sure you already know, but just so it's out there. The Cheyenne woman who started the Sovereign Bodies Institute. I don't know if you know about that. They map the cases of missing and murdered Indigenous women on a database. Mm-hmm. And she is saying that there were 5,712 reports of missing Indigenous women and girls based on the National Crime Information Center data. And some cases were likely repeated. But the Justice Department that same year only had 116 cases rather than the 5,712. And that 56% of Native American women have experienced sexual violence, and 84% have experienced violence at all. So let me just ask a question. Why are Native American women especially vulnerable, do you think, Bree? And since you were the first to mention.
Yeah, so I want to touch back on the U.S. numbers versus her numbers. I think a lot of it is because a big portion of the 5,000 is Canadian.
Oh, okay.
Which are still Native American.
Right.
I think that's why there's a lack of true reporting on this. But as far as why Native American are more vulnerable, you know, I can come up with a lot of reasons. You know, the sexualization of Native American women through costumes. You know, because they break it down to just the Constitution of America, where savages are not equal to human. You know, that still comes through today. Native Americans, I don't think, get the same equality as Americans. So I think that that's why there's an injustice for this, and that they're vulnerable, because I don't think that they're cared about as much as someone else who might go missing of a different skin color appearance.
What do you think, Christina?
Yeah, Bree touched on a couple of hot topics there. I think she's talking about the sexualization of of Indian women. It goes back to, you know, I think when you look at the costumes that we wear at Halloween, and Pocahontas, the Disney movie, and when you historically take it back, it all comes back to this onslaught of assimilation, acculturation, and a change in complete lifestyle. You know, a lot of Native communities, especially in the Southeast, which is where the Creeks originate from, it was all a matrilineal society. You know, the women played a very important role and was honored and elevated. So when you start to change the dynamics, when you move out west and you get certain, like the Land Allotment Act and the Dawes Act, when in order to get your land, you had to name a male head of household. So when you change this dynamic from a very matriarchal society to a very a completely different perspective, and again, it's that whole superiority, this is the best way and this is how you should be, and we're going to change your whole dynamic. It changes the way women were revered and women were looked at, because now they weren't as important. So I think a lot of that change in the culture put them into a vulnerable perspective. And then you add on, you know, socioeconomic impact and not having as much access. That combined, and it's just, I think it leads and it makes them proportionally more vulnerable.
And then you ask the question, if this happens on tribal land and you're a non-tribal person committing these crimes, who governs that?
Exactly. Yeah, because there was a Supreme Court decision in 1978 that actually ruled that the tribal nations lacked authority if it was a non-native person who was the perpetrator on tribal land. Which, of course, what is the message that gives?
That you're free to do whatever you want to.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. There's two things that I have been reading, and I want to go, when we talk about the recent Supreme Court decision that was good news.
Yes.
I want to get some history from you all on the Allotment Act and the Dawes Act, so we have that background. But House Bill 1585, the Violence Against Women Re-authorization Act, that's two people that have been involved in that is the Kansas representative Karen Bass and the New Mexico representative, who is Native American, Deb Haaland, Haaland. And what it says is tribal jurisdiction over crimes of domestic violence, dating violence, obstruction of justice, sexual violence, sex trafficking, stalking, and assault of a law enforcement officer or corrections officer is going to be under the, give the tribes jurisdiction of all of that violence and crime. What is your reaction to that?
If you're going to allow the community where these atrocities are occurring to kind of govern that, I think, and it comes back to the education and the culture as well. I think the community has a better awareness and is more attuned to dealing with those scenarios. And I know I'll take it back to like drug addiction and drug court. And I know a lot of tribal communities will govern their own addiction and tribal court programs, and they bring in like healing circles and a native approach. So I would be optimistic that allowing the tribal nation and that governing body to be more involved in those processes may start to change the amount of how that occurs, and let the community start to say, no, this isn't okay, and heal from outward, from in to out, and hopefully change the dynamic and the direction of the of how frequent and these type of crimes occur. So I would be optimistic with that.
Well, it's only a bill, Christina.
Yeah.
It's not an act yet. So, Bree, and any additional thoughts from you about it?
And the same with Christina. You know, I'd be very optimistic for it, but again, we'll see if it happens.
Well, here's how I feel. I feel we got to change the administration in DC, because this is a bill that'll just sit in committee forever, just like the bill in the House and the Senate to establish a commission to study reparations and by proposals for remedies. Those are the bills that'll get out with a shift in administration in Congress, I think, in the Senate especially. So I'm hopeful once that happens, you'll see this enacted. And
yeah, I got a little excited there.
It makes tremendous sense, does it not? It certainly deserves to happen.
Perhaps the Supreme Court, the SCOTUS case on McGirt versus Oklahoma will help lead some of those bills to more light, because that's a dynamic change, that, you know, a major ruling on behalf of Native countries. So perhaps that'll be the way of the kind of leading the way of the future.
I think so, and in my view, and you know, I see my daughter and her generation. I think things like this happening is kind of awakening a bear. You know, she's tired of it. So I think this younger generation, you know, the current administration has, for lack of a better word, pissed off a lot of people. And I think that you're starting to see like enough's enough, like with the pipeline, enough is enough. Start walking, you know, so I do see that there's a rise within the community of Native Americans, that they're just tired of it, and we want more.
Fantastic. That's wonderful to hear. And I think that awakening and that energy for taking action is happening across the board, I think, in the U.S. And since you brought it up, let us go to the Supreme Court ruling that was cheerful good news in July. The McGirt versus Oklahoma, that it's, you want to explain it? I mean, I can read it, but Christina, you want to tell us what happened?
Oh yeah, it was just a ruling on behalf of Indian country, where they there was a series of crimes, and one committed on Indian land. And when it was initially heard, and this was in the McGirt, this was the prior case, which ended up spawning the McGirt case. But basically, you know, it was about jurisdiction and where crimes are committed. And what ended up happening is they realized, hey, this crime was committed not on Oklahoma land, but this was on tribal land. And we can appeal this based on the fact that way back when Oklahoma and the states started to become about, they never formally resolved the reservation. Mm-hmm. So like 2/3 of Oklahoma is in essence still considered a reservation.
Right, under the treaty in 1866, yes. Right.
And this is all sparked from an attorney who had previously did mineral rights.
Oh, really? Tell us more about that.
I don't remember her name. Maybe you do, Christina, but do you remember in the podcast that we were listening to that they dug deeper, and she ironically enough, she was the only one that realized, let's do a little bit deeper look at the ground rights and who actually has rights to this. I wish I remember her name too.
Yeah, it was a podcast. I wish I.
Our Land, is that the
This
one?
Land was the podcast, but there was
it was by Rebecca Nagel, a podcast.
So what do you think the ramifications of this act are going to be? What are your first thoughts about that, Bree?
Honestly, I think we're in the beginning stages of all of this. I had a patient recently who has land out there and a very big company out there, and I was talking to her about this. I'm like, what do you think about this? She hadn't heard about it at the time before the ruling. I think people are thinking that they get 2/3 of the land back, so that's theirs. But really it's just who governs the land.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a starting point, in my opinion.
Yeah, powerful. I know it was greeted with great good news across Native American country.
Well, you're going to start to see, I'm seeing more and more about it, but a movement called Land Back. Essentially, like what happened in Oklahoma, there are other tribal nations that are wanting the same.
Yeah, I was reading where the Indian Land Capital Company in Little Canada, Minnesota, was actually helping tribes reclaim sacred lands through funding for them. Which brings me back to what you mentioned earlier, Christina, when you were talking about the allotments and Dawes Act, because that was so damaging to who really owned the land. I mean, it was so fragmented. Do you want to elaborate on that?
Yeah, I'm not well versed in it. I got a little bit of it when I was doing some studies at Oklahoma State University, or Southeastern Oklahoma State University. I had done a Native American leadership program through there. And, it was devastating in the sense that, okay, we relocated and you're going to have this particular land base, right? And then they allot and they decide, okay, so there's this many people and there's all these millions of acres of land still. What should we ever do with it? So what they allowed was white settlers to start partitioning off, different parts of the land. And again, that was the impact of acculturation, assimilation, because if you mix, white settlers amongst the native land, that further dilutes the experience. And I think someone described it to me as it's like a sheet cake where like the icing layer, it could be Indian next to a white owned piece of property. And it's like the top layer of the sheet is all mixed, but underneath the land base was still reservation land. It's just that the sheet cake, the top of the sheet cake was divvied up and, sold and,
there was even an era where even though you were Native American and you owned it, you had to have a Caucasian person manage it.
Wow, right. Yeah, and from what I understand about the Allotment Act, there were so many owners of different little pieces that it was hard to get decisions made about setting up businesses and doing that sort of enterprise and commerce on the reservation. I had something else I wanted to say about that, but I cannot recall it.
Yeah, I think it'll be fine. I mean, the tribal communities out there, the tribal nations, the Creek, Seminole, the Chickasaw, the Cherokee, they all do very well managing. And to be honest with you, a lot of Oklahoma benefits from the degree to which the tribal nations have been able to successfully manage themselves. There is a big movement to try to get ceremonial lands back. I'd read an article not that long ago about Big Sur, and there was a piece of Big Sur that was just given back. So I think, like Bree said, you're on stolen land. The movement to get land back is a part of the awakening that's occurring, and it's reassuring to see.
Yeah. And I was surprised that when President Obama was in office, each year he was in office, he held a conference on a Native American reservation
Oh, wow.
about what they were needing and what their lives were like, et cetera. And as a matter of fact, I just want to tell you this, in 2012, the U.S. paid a settlement of $1 billion to 41 tribes, most of them or many of them in the western part of the country, because the Interior and Treasury Departments had failed to adequately oversee the Indian lands from companies that exploited a wide variety of resources,
Oh,
some
yeah.
dating back over 100 years. So that was good news back then. We need more of that.
These treaties were put in place, and I don't think that, Native Americans have really made the government hold these treaties. And this Oklahoma one, that's a perfect example of a treaty that was put in place and that need to be held accountable for. Well, there's still hundreds of other treaties that were signed before our time that that need to be upheld. So I'm hopeful and optimistic that things will change.
And that is why the Lakota folks did get restitution from the government for because the Badlands were so rich in natural resources and minerals, and the profit that was made off of it is in the billions and billions over time. But the settlement from the government to the Lakota people was so little. It was millions, and they just put it in the bank, and they're not touching it. They're pursuing that case more fully so they get reasonable restitution for what has happened.
I think a big push there is the land back as well. They want lands.
And that's beautiful country. I drove through the Badlands. It's gorgeous.